So, as Phil said, I'm John. I work for an agency called Fisheye, just over in Shrewsbury, not too far away from here. I've been working with Magento for far too long now, and as you can see, I'm a self-confessed orange addict. My main passion is helping developers get more out of Magento too. And just to note from Vinay's talk earlier, I've started collecting badges, certifications. Okay, so I am well aware I stand between all you lovely people and your lunch, so I'll keep this as quick as I can. There is a lot to get through, so don't worry about taking everything off each slide. There will be a link at the end. Okay, so layout XML, the most exciting thing ever, right? Yeah, okay, so basically this talk isn't actually about layout itself. There's my really, really boring PWA reference. So yeah, sorry, well, not sorry. The talk is actually about reusable components and decoupling or separation of code. Layout's just the tool that we're going to use to do that. So overview of what we're going to go through. Just arguments and view models. I did want to do a little bit on page layouts, but time constraints mean that probably isn't going to happen. Right, so let's go straight into it, arguments. So arguments are a thing in Magento 2's layout XML that mean you can pass data from layout to a block. They could be of many different types, strings, numbers, even objects, and there's some custom ones as well. Here's a really basic example. We've got just an argument here with the name of title, its type, the exercise type there, string, and the value of my title. And we can get that in our block or in our template file just by doing a get data call and passing in the name parameter. Simple as that, really. So with that in mind, what we want to have a look at is a really basic scenario. So let's say we've been asked to display delivery and returns information on the product detail page. The content needs to be in a modal, and it needs to be triggered by clicking or tapping on a link. And the key thing, with the reusability in mind, this functionality is needed across multiple projects. So this talk is kind of from an SI perspective, from an agency perspective. So we're going to need a really simple module, Fisheye delivery returns. We're going to need some layout, block class, template file, and we're going to use Magento's jQuery modal widget. Don't worry if you don't know what it is. It's just JS component for creating modal pop-ups, essentially. So we'll start with some really basic layout. We're just adding a block on the product page, and we're adding it after the kind of like the add to wish list, add to compare links. So if we jump straight into our template, basically we've got an element. We've got a data Mage init call here, which this basically is just initializing our JavaScript component. We've called it Fisheye delivery and returns modal. We're going to pass a little bit of configuration in. We've got a title and the modal class. Next on down in the file, we have a link. This is to trigger our modal. Finally, we have our target. This is where our content goes. So don't worry about what block get content is or does at the moment, but if it helps, let's just say it's getting it from a CMS, like a static block in the admin. Okay, so finally, we just need a JavaScript file. This is setting the modal component on our target and passing a config that we've just set in the template. Finally, we've got a click event listener to trigger our modal. So here is our beautifully styled delivery info link, and here is some lovely content. So, done. Just go have some lunch. So basically, I'm going to highlight a few issues, basically. First one being template. So I had a bit of a Google, had a bit of a read. Definition of template is something that serves as a model for others to copy, or in a computing sense, a preset format for your document or file. So we keep it in the computing sense, but take it away from programming a minute. Something even more exciting. Let's imagine a Microsoft Word template. If you were creating a template for a Microsoft Word document, you wouldn't go putting things like the title or anything like that into the template. It's a template. It's a skeleton for reuse. So what I'm getting at is the template we've created isn't really a template at the moment. Most of the code is actually boilerplate, just the containing HTML markup that we need. We've also got some implementation code in there, and that means that they're tightly coupled together, basically. So issues with this approach, especially keep bearing in mind, I mentioned this needs to be across multiple projects. If we need to change any of the text or any of the CSS classes, or even just change our modal config, we want to change it to a slide out from a pop-up, because that's one of the configuration options in the jQuery modal widget. That means we've got to duplicate the file. So if we let's say we install this module on 10 projects. We duplicate the template file 10 times to change any of those things, and then later we realize, oh, actually, in our original template, we should have escaped the HTML output for security reasons. So now we've got to go back, update 10 template files across 10 projects, 10 more deployments. Not particularly great. So what can we do about it? Well, we can use arguments, of course. So we jump back into our template. I've highlighted 4 things here, the title and link text, and 2 of the classes. To remove those, replace them with arguments, using the get data here, and we just pass them in via layout XML. Pretty simple stuff. What that now means, if we want to change any of that stuff in a custom theme on any of those 10 sites I keep referring to, we can now just go in and replace it via layout. No overwriting of the file. It means we've got much better maintenance and upgradability. So it's a lot better. Okay. So with that in mind as well, it's easier for us to add new things. If you want to add new config types, like I mentioned, the type of the modal, we can now do that a lot easier. Just pass in an argument, and obviously, in this case, we need to account for it in our JS file. That's not everything, though. There are still a couple more things we need to account for. So we've created this JS component, the fisheye delivery returns modal JavaScript file. If we want a similar modal, let's say clients now asked us that, oh, we really like that modal, can we have something else in a modal? So if we want a similar modal, we either depend on this thing we've just written called fisheye delivery returns, which isn't really relevant, or we have to duplicate this code and add another JavaScript file. And I think, as everyone knows, the standard Magento 2 front end does not need another JavaScript request. So again, jump back into our template. Basically what I'm saying is this is too specific. This is just a modal. It's got nothing to do with delivering returns. We're now starting to abstract most of the things out. Again, this doesn't make a lot of sense either. It's just a modal module with a modal component. The other thing to note here, at this point, this layout wouldn't even belong in the modal module. You'd put this layout in your theme or in another custom module that's making use of this sort of abstracted module. So basically now I've got a module that doesn't really have any implementation. If you install it on a site, it's not going to do anything. It just provides something for you to use as a base. Okay, one more thing. The content I kind of said to ignore at the start, well, actually, it's tightly coupled to our block, and this is now just a modal component. The content has got nothing to do with creating a modal. Basically, we need to decouple them. So instead of getting content from the block, let's just get child block. So now we can just pass anything in layout. So this example, we're passing in a CMS block that we've just created there. So much better. Also, you could just move any other layout element into our component now. I wouldn't say possibilities are endless, but let's say that. But what we can do now is we can create any modal with any content, any configuration values, any location on the site, all from one component with less maintenance and upgrade concerns. So that all sounds lovely in theory, but I didn't just make this up. So here's a couple of examples, more than a couple. Here's our lovely delivery and returns out in the wild. Sorry, I really wanted to use that cat picture. So, lovely delivery and returns example. We've got embedding a video example, size guides, and even sort of adding the whole add to basket process. It doesn't really matter. The point is the content doesn't matter. We've now got a reusable component. So just a few considerations. Should always account for arguments not being passed in your code. So you can set default values or add error handling. Same goes for the type, the arguments you use. I would be quite strict on the types. If somebody passes in the wrong type, add an error handling for it. And also important, document the arguments that your component can use. Will help future you and your colleagues and anyone else. If you want to have a look, this thing does exist. It's not the real implementation we use, but it's a good example, hopefully. So summary for this part. Reuse code where you can as components, provide flexibility by passing in arguments rather than putting implementation into your templates. Hopefully that means we can write less code, especially boilerplate code, and makes our maintenance and upgrade burden less, so we're reducing our technical debt, basically. And finally, it's not about the tool, it's about the approach. So what I'm getting at here is, yes, this is layout XML, it's the boring standard Magento 2 front end, not fancy new React example, but what I'm saying is the framework doesn't really matter. This could be a React component. This is terrible React example code, so please don't judge me on it, but you get the point. it doesn't really matter. We'll create the component for reuse. Okay, so that's part one done. Second part, view models. So nearly done, nearly food, don't worry. Right, view model then. Basically, these are classes you can use in addition to a block. They help you, again, to decouple your custom logic from Magento. So again, about reuse and decoupling is the theme here. So why would we want to do this? Magento's default block classes handle things such as outputting HTML, getting child blocks, or even escaping our output. So if we reference single responsibility principle from Solid, it tells us that a class should only have one purpose, or another way of saying it, quite famously, is one reason to change. So if Magento's block classes are already handling probably more than one concern, we should definitely be using something else for our custom presentation logic. So, benefits of using them, like I noted, we've got separation of Magento and custom code. We have no inheritance now. We only need to inject what we need for our viewModel class. That makes it easier to write testable code because we have no parent dependencies to mock. It's easier to understand, maintain, and upgrade, and generally, just more fun to work with. Okay, a couple of limitations. It is Magento 2.2 only, and you still need, if you want to do any kind of custom block caching, you probably would need to extend the block class stuff. Okay, so how do we use them? You guessed it, back with arguments again. So, as I know, this talk isn't massively about layout, it's pretty much just about, I should have called it level up your arguments. Anyway, another really quick scenario, this time really, really simple. Displaying store information in the footer of the site. So we're going to get the phone number and the opening hours, and we're just going to put them in the footer. Another small module, got layout, template file, and this time we have a view model, no block. So again, a little bit of layout. We're adding a block in the footer, like I said. We've got another argument, but this time we're passing in a type of object. And what we pass in is our class name. Basically, we're creating a store information view model. Other thing to note is, because we can now use view models, Magento's default template block class is now considered default, so you don't even need to pass it in to your layout. And let's jump into our view model. I'm not going to go into the full code, it's not overly complex anyway. Just highlighting the point here that we're not injecting anything other than what we need, which is a couple of classes to help us get store information. Other thing you might have noticed is we've got this thing that we're implementing called argument interface. So what is this? It's basically an interface that every view model has to implement. If you don't, you'll get an error. The reason for this is to ensure that only classes that are intended to be view models are used or passed in via layout XML. The reason for this is to make you consider, you have to make a consideration about what you want to use, and to stop you from passing all sorts of weird and wonderful things. If you didn't have this in place, you could, in theory, pass in a controller or an observer. I would not like to see what happens. So we just jump back into our view model, a couple of basic methods, get our phone number, get our store hours, and we've got a private method there to get the data in the first place. Really basic template file. Again, we're getting our argument. This time we're storing it to a variable. And then we're just outputting those using the store information variable. But you can see that that's intertwined now with still using our block variable to do things like escaping. So, slightly more expanded example, but that's basically all we've just done. And that is our whistle-stop tour of view models, really. Again, reference with a little bit more examples, as I'll come on to it in a second. So considerations again. Please don't call view models view model in layout XML. Give them a proper name. What's their purpose? That helps you think about what it is that your class does, and then if your class does too much, you can then split it out. So the next thing is using multiple view models is good. Again, separation of concerns. But don't add too many. If you're going to go over 3 or 4, I think Yissi sat down here at one point, mentioned about using 9 or something, and it got a bit confusing. So I would definitely, if you've got over 4, say, I would definitely consider whether your block needs splitting up into more blocks. Again, you need to consider how you're handling the data you're passing as arguments. Try and avoid passing the whole of the block as a parameter into a method in the view model. Again, create and reuse these for common use cases. So we've just shown a store information one, but you could have a product one or a category one. The more we can reuse, the less code we have to write and the less code we have to manage. Bit of credit here for Yissi, Vinay, and Fabian. These articles are really good, so if you want to have a read up, check them out. That is it, and I realise I've just gone like 10 seconds over. So basically, think twice. What I'm trying to say here is use what works for you in a scenario. Don't get hung up on abstracting everything. Basically, use some common sense. I remember everything I've shown you is a fairly simple example, so just bear that in mind. So, food. All right, thank you.
No question. Oh, one. Yissi.
Well, it's actually a little attempt to bash you a little bit. What does Vinay actually think about the XML layout arguments? Vinay? Where's Vinay?
I think it's backstage.
Oh, backstage. Well, then I don't have any comments.
Thank you.